represents Allison and Bird. He co-heads the venture and M&A practice for Allison and Bird in the kind of the legal area. And he's going to moderate our panel. I'll let you do a little background about yourself. You're going to just introduce the panelists.
Terrific. Thanks so much, Tristan. So as you mentioned, I co-head our venture and M&A practice here in Alston & Bird's Palo Alto office. We're very active in the mobile space and enjoy working very much with investors in the mobile space as well as entrepreneurs anywhere from the formation stage through multiple rounds of venture and growth capital, and then strategizing with them for very successful exits, either through the public markets or increasingly through strategic M&A transactions. So, look forward to conversing with you soon about what's hot and a little bit about what's not.
All right, perfect. Now, next is our panelists. Let's start from the right side here. Eric Zimitz is the managing director of Granite Ventures. Eric, would you like to quickly introduce yourself?
Sure. Can you hear me with the mic? Or do I need it?
You need a mic.
Need the mic. Okay. Is that better? So, Granite Ventures, we do early stage venture capital, IT only, so we don't do any healthcare, no biotech, no devices. Fairly traditional in that context. We look specialty areas. I'd say include things like enterprise software, digital media, payment technologies, of course, mobile is a space we look at quite closely as well. We tend to be investing right now in some of the emerging areas like wearable computing. We're looking more recently at opportunities around commerce and commerce-related areas like Bitcoin. I think it's probably enough.
Next, John Chipindi from Relay Ventures.
Thanks. John Acapenti with Relay Ventures. We are strictly mobile, so we've been doing that since 2008. We have 45 companies, all mobile payments, mobile commerce, mobile application development, mobile ad tech, and all of our partners focus on that. And so that we're early stage. We're currently managing $300 million actively, and that's a little bit about us.
Quinn Lee is the VP and Managing Director of Qualcomm Ventures.
So I'm Quinn Lee with Qualcomm Ventures, so we're the corporate venture arm for Qualcomm.
Can you
hear? Yeah. Better? Okay. So we invest across the mobile ecosystem, so all the way from consumer application software all the way through infrastructure. More recently, we also expanded into new areas like mobile health, data center infrastructure, and cloud, as well as areas like wearables and also IoT, Internet of Things. We have a global practice. So we invest in 7 different regions around the world. Currently have about 120 portfolio companies globally, and we invest also across stages, all the way from C to Series A and B and later stages as well.
Okay, and next is Jeff Karas from Managing Director of Singtel Innovate Ventures. Singtel Innovate joins us for the first time, so Jeff is quite new to us. Please go ahead.
So hi, good to meet you all. So Jeff Karras. So Singtel Innovate is a relatively new fund. It's about a 3.5-4-year-old fund, $250 million, and our backer is Singapore Telecom. And Singapore Telecom is actually the second largest carrier footprint in the world. It's about 530 million mobile subscribers across 26 countries. It's 6 operating companies under one umbrella, and is fairly dominant in Southeast Asia. So we've been very active as a venture fund. We've invested in all stages. We've done about 46 investments in the last 3.5 years. Everything from about $200,000 seed to a $20 million later stage. Across all sectors, things you might expect from something related to telco to things that a telco might actually become or work themselves into at some point in the future. So that's enterprise, digital media, again as well. So
Last but not least, Steve Goldberg, partner from Venrock.
And well, thanks for having me. I've been here a number of times. It's good to be back. Venrock's, most of you know, it's a 45-year-old venture firm, original arm of the Rockefeller family. I guess almost $3 billion under management. We do it always sounds funny to say this, we do a little bit of everything. We do about 40% healthcare and 60% tech, and everything from medical devices to biotechnology to pharma to consumer internet and mobility and hardware. And I've carved out my spot. I'm definitely the science guy. So I do what I love. So all the hardware stuff, including the mobility and now robots and satellites and drones and all the fun stuff.
Great. With that, as you can see, we have a very diverse, well-balanced, mobile-savvy investors in our panel. What we're going to do next is we're going to have Ted come up here, help set the stage a little bit for this panel, sharing some market stats and what the general trend is on the mobile side of the market. And then we'll kick off the panel. Okay?
Thanks again, Tristan. So with all these VCs in attendance, it just wouldn't be appropriate unless we took you through a series of hockey stick charts. So pulled a few together. So our first slide comes from a really terrific presentation that I'd recommend everybody to take a more thorough look at if you've got the moment. But Benedict Evans from Andreessen Horowitz put together a presentation titled "Mobile is Eating the World," which is where this chart comes from. And there are really kind of two main points about where things stand today. So the first is that there will be an additional billion people that will go online over the next 6 years. And then more importantly, by 2020, internet access is equivalent to smartphone access. So, or to kind of shortcut it, by 2020, the internet equals mobile. Second slide that describes kind of where things stand today, taken from Mary Meeker of Kleiner Perkins and her really wonderful presentation that she does annually on internet trends. And so this is from her 2014 internet trends. And I liked this slide in particular, both because it has the ever required hockey stick to it, but it also covers, this is the growth in Amazon Web Services objects. And the main point with this is that it's really tracking the growth of mobile devices, and that as we look at the cloud, increasingly growth in the cloud is being driven by growth in mobile. So mobile apps, mobile sensors, and mobile data really driving and powering the cloud. So kind of keeping with our theme, we can say that in a lot of ways the cloud is also mobile. And then finally, to also borrow from one of I thought the more interesting slides that Mary put together, is this one that details the top 10 global internet properties. Some of the fascinating things about this is that when we're talking about the global internet properties, there are really only two countries that are represented, and it's the U.S. and China. But if you look closely, you see that even for the top U.S. properties, they're really dwarfed by the presence of their international users. The other thing that I think is kind of fascinating about this, and maybe I will segue to turning things over to our panel in the moment, is hopefully we'll have some controversy around what people will forecast in the way of change as we start to roll forward growth. And so even though we've got 6 of the top 10 properties based in the U.S. currently, I'm going to kind of go out with my prediction that in the next 2 years, we'll at least see this flip with 6 of the top 10 probably in China and only 4 left in the U.S. So I look forward to taking on some of our panelists with that prediction. And so, let me see. So why don't we start, Steve? I'm going to ask you to kick things off in our panel, and to stick with the theme of what you guys each find interesting. I'm going to ask each of our panelists to start by describing what their perfect startup investment would look like. Kind of sector, stage, team. What are the things that get you very excited, so that each of the participants in our audience knows to which panelists they should approach first.
Well, in some ways, for traditional VC like Venrock, half the question's really easy and half is really hard. So the real easy part is you want to get in early and you want to have a lot of ownership. So it's wonderful to get in deals, when you can, if you think there's a great opportunity and it aligns with what you like. But the reality is, earlier is better. And at Venrock, we're a partnership, so we kind of, it's the unanimous vote kind of thing. So you have to convince your colleagues that it's the right thing to do. So the sweet spot is right at Series A. For us, we don't do that many seeds. In most markets, except in maybe some sort of hardcore technology markets where you've got a couple of university professors that spin out with some work that they've been working on for 10 years, and there's no market risk. If you bring a certain drug to market, or you bring, a certain technology to market, you're gonna sell everything you can build. Those don't come along that often, but so for the most part, it's a Series A deal. And then, so that's the easy part. The hard part, and having been an entrepreneur, I think the sobering part is, even though there are lots and lots of companies that are being seeded, they talk about the Series A crunch. So at the Series A, the bar is pretty high. So what do we look for? We look for companies that have built something. And again, for software companies, that says one thing. For pure hardware companies, it's the same thing, but it's a little tougher. We talk about Kickstarter and some of the crowdfunding things that have made it a little bit better for hardware, but we need to see something. And then we need to have that something shown to some market with some response. We don't need to see revenue. I mean, again, earlier is better, but sort of the risk profile is people have looked at it and touched it and said, if you do this, this, and this, we would love to buy this. So the sweet spot is Series A, something to show the market with some traction. And if you pushed me, I could come back, but if you pushed me to say specifically, well, for me, I gave it away a few minutes ago, it's kind of the hardware stuff. I'm not sure I see much in the Internet of Things for small companies. I think the barrier to entry is so low that even the big companies can do something. They don't have to innovate too much to put a processor and a sensor and a comm link in a package and do something with it. I think there's some wonderful things that can be done with mobility and artificial intelligence and analytics. And it doesn't necessarily speak to smartphones, but sort of if you just think about mobile devices, drones or robots. I think so. Autonomous vehicles, that kind of thing. I think there's huge opportunities, and we're probably just really getting started there. And then I'll stretch it and say I think that fits in the mobility market.
Terrific, Jeff.
Yeah, so again, we're stage agnostic, so when I look at stage, I think what I want to look for is that it's sort of, if you think about it, it's a risk-reward continuum across stages, and you want it to be an appropriate level of risk and reward based on the stage that you're at, or certainly the stage that you're paying for. Generally though, earlier, obviously in many ways, it is better, but certainly more risky, but again, that's sort of the name of the venture game. And, looking for, in terms of entrepreneurs, we like passionate entrepreneurs that, know their space, know their stuff, have, realistic expectations, but also can dream about what those ideas can really turn into. And so there's sort of an X factor that we're always looking for in the entrepreneur. Across sectors and spaces, obviously, we like mobility, and enterprise mobility we're excited about. We are excited about some of the things around Internet of Things, but that's a broad category. and we can talk about that, I'm sure, a little bit later. But you know, the other thing I guess that we touched on here is in terms of what we're looking for that gets us sort of from moving more quickly. Again, it is some level of validation. So you know, whether it is a a proof of concept with somebody, whether it's getting some code written. It's harder these days, especially given the dynamics of the other investments that we see, to not invest in something where the entrepreneurs have actually made some level of progress and gotten some level of validation.
Terrific. Quinn?
Yeah, sure. I think in terms of stages, we're similar to Jeff in terms of we're agnostic in terms of which stage we invest in. I think given the risk reward profile, we evaluate these companies accordingly. In terms of sectors, I would say we're still doing a lot of investment in mobile, and then within mobile, what we like is companies that build, I would say, products that we call mobile first. Means it's a product that's uniquely for mobile. So example would be like Waze, for example, right? It's not a desktop application that's translated to mobile, but it's an application that's built specific for mobile. And then the other category of companies we like is we like to find potential leaders in the marketplace. Sometimes it's hard to identify those early stages. Maybe you have to invest a little bit later when they have some traction. So in the wearable space, for example, we're invested in Fitbit, which are I think the leader in that market. And outside of mobile, I think we're looking into drones and robotics. It's a new area for us, and then mobile health is another sector we're very interested in.
Terrific. John?
So I was really fortunate in my early career. I was early employee at Netscape, and Netscape wasn't just like a company, but it felt more like a movement. It was we were doing something really important, and I'm looking for companies that can have that kind of feel. We believe that mobile is really the most transformative technology of our lifetime. How long did it take the TV to actually become ubiquitous? Maybe 30 years, something. How long did it take the smartphone to become ubiquitous? 2 years. And 80% of the population, if you look at the Mark Andreessen's and the Andreessen-Horowitz graphs, are really amazing, that 80% of the population will now have a phone. It's not a phone. In 1995, when I opened up my laptop and it was a Pentium computer chip in it, this thing is 625 times more powerful than that. This thing has sensors in it, and it's personal, and it's with me all the time. So what I'm really looking for is entrepreneurs that are both passionate, they have a different mental model of the world, and they want to disrupt something that's happening today. In our first fund, we did a lot of infrastructure, mobile payments, mobile commerce, mobile application development. We liked a lot of those plays. In our second fund, our most current fund, we're really looking at how is this disrupting existing markets? How is it disrupting medicine and healthcare, and how citizens have these computers in their pockets, and how can they advocate for their own body? Beyond the Fitbits now, the next generation is diagnostics that are FDA approved, and that's really interesting. Connected consumer, connected car, like our cars spin off 20 gigabytes of data every hour. They are computers on wheels, and we spend a lot of time in the context of traveling these things. But that has not even been touched. So as an entrepreneur, this is an amazing time to be investing. We're really excited, and we want to find them early, so that when they emerge, as the movement emerges, there's a number one spot, and there's a leadership position. So looking for those entrepreneurs that really have different mental models of the world, that can execute before other people really can understand that that's the right way, so that they can continue to drive a leadership position. And then as an investor, investing in the number one in a space and taking on a new market is where you really make hay.
Fantastic. Yeah, thanks. Well, I'll try to be incremental on the last one on this question. In terms of stage, as I said, we're early. Seed A is where we prefer to be. We'll look at B's too, if the price is right, if it's a space we love, for sure. Founders are important. We think they're critically important. We love a founder that can really go the distance with the company, right? Because they're going to set the vision. They may change the vision over time, but they'll establish a vision, culture. Hopefully, culture doesn't change too much, and hopefully have self-awareness, right? If the founder's good enough to be CEO, that's great. If they're not, being able to recognize that and step aside when the time is right is important as well. In terms of areas, all the stuff, yeah, I agree with everything everybody said. I guess, just kind of thematically, I find wearable computing kind of interesting in a sense that it's, looking over, like, what's the real big disruptive opportunity right now? We're all kind of settling on, hey, smartphones, great. 2020, people are forecasting 5-10 years in the future on smartphones, and at some point, they're going to be wrong, right? Because it won't be the smartphone anymore. It's going to be something else, right? And what it is, I don't know, but I look at wearables saying, well, it might be that, right? You start disaggregating a smartphone into its component parts, and, the world's going to change, and it won't be the smartphone. And guarantee you that will happen. I don't know when. I'd like to say 2020 BS, but it probably won't. Yeah, maybe too short a time frame. So I think things like that are certainly worth tracking. Steve, I agree with Steve on IoT. I think consumer IoT is tricky because it's hard to differentiate. But I do like the more what's the right term? Not just enterprise IoT or the infrastructure IoT. If you will, I think robotics and the drones are going to be very impactful technologies, and they're really very differentiated by software and algorithms, and that's, I think, a very good sustainable advantage for a startup to have.
Terrific. So I'd like to follow up, and Eric, if you'll be a good sport, I'm going to put you back under the spotlight, and kind of ask you to drill down a little bit and contrast, to the extent that it's applicable, or just tell me I'm flat out wrong. But contrast. We've now heard what each of you is looking for in terms of an investment. If you would flip that around to kind of make it more directly advice to an entrepreneur, so somebody who is looking at starting a new venture today, what would you direct them to do, both in terms of what steps they should be taking, but would you send them into the exact same sectors, or knowing that they're going to be kind of at the very, very early stage, would you direct them elsewhere?
Yeah, I think I would never direct anybody anywhere relative to the area in which they want to innovate, right? Because that's a very personal thing, right? It's got to be something that's, I don't know, too vague or new age here, but it's got to be sort of inside you, right? You have to have that sort of say, oh no, you're a jack of all trade entrepreneur. Go work on a wearable device. You should be able to do anything. I'm not sure there are some people like that, I suspect, but I'm not going to tell folks what to build. So I think you got to have that first of all, and that's got to be something you really believe in. And beyond that, I think actually Steve laid it again pretty well, right? I mean, this day and age, the cost of innovation is pretty low, right? The capital's there; it doesn't require a lot of it, right? So software is very easy to advance and take to the point where you can show customers and generate some interest, and hopefully use that to generate funding. Hardware's become a little less simple, but there are crowdsourcing mechanisms upon which to advance your technology and demonstrate some consumer traction as well, or not consumer, customer traction.
Fantastic. Kind of jump ball to our panel in terms of entrepreneur advice.
What I'm looking for is people that have been thinking about a problem for a long time, so they're passionate about it. They see the world in a different way, and I think it's hard to be an entrepreneur to go, put up a whiteboard and pick a bunch of different business models and look at different areas and say, I'm going to go start a company in that area, because chances are there's probably 100 other people that have gone through the same exercise, and so I really think it's important to kind of come from an experience of solving a real pain that you see out in the world, and you want to be passionate about it, because ultimately you're going to get 30 no's, from VCs like me, and there's one that's going to fall in love with you at the same time and have the same idea and then want to work with you. So it just takes a lot of perseverance and time and energy to do that. So I really like to see entrepreneurs that are really finding. They've been thinking about a problem for a long time, they've lived it, and they're trying to solve that moving forward. And if you don't have that, join a team that does have some vision on that, and then become passionate about it with them, another founding team, and that would be my advice.
Yeah, the only thing I guess to add is, I agree very much with the solving a pain point, understanding that pain point. I would also suggest make sure they go out and talk to who the eventual customers or users will be and understand that perspective. Doing that earlier, I think a lot of people just stand behind the whiteboard and don't actually do the interactive understanding of what's really actually out there and what needs to be out there. The only thing I was thinking about sort of part of your question about sectors and, would I recommend people go into, the sectors or different sectors? Are these full? Are these too crowded? So I would say that there's ways to disrupt practically anything out there. So I would not discourage anyone from looking at any sector. Even if there's lots of competitors, there's ways to completely step in front of those as well. But there's still just a ton of industries that haven't even been touched and are just starting to completely ripe for disruption that are also really exciting places to go as well.
I'd try to come up with some model here, and it probably doesn't cover everything, but I think it covers a lot of ground, is if you sort of draw a line and you talk about sort of B2C versus B2B businesses. So consumer businesses, we're all consumers, so we can all make an argument that we know what we want, at least individually, or you've thought about something for a long time. And these days, with the metrics that, whether it's a software product or a hardware product that you can put on Kickstarter, there are mechanisms for a relatively small amount of money to test lots of things. I'm not going to say everything, but you can test lots. So you write some code, you write a new game, you write some, you do something that's, I don't know, any sort of consumer vertical, even health vertical, and you get it out there and you try it. We're not going to argue with you, no matter who you are, no matter what your credentials are. You got 1 million, 2 million, 5 million users, and the numbers are big. So I realize it's, he didn't say 10,000 or 50,000, a million or 2 or 3, we'll buy in. It's like when we see the exponential growth, we're in. So that's, just sort of echoing what Eric said, all the passion and everything, but we're not going to ask too many questions when the numbers speak for themselves. On the B2B side, I think it's a lot tougher, because I think you have to be highly differentiated. We're going to diligence it. We're going to talk to the people who are going to make the purchases. And so either your team is differentiated in market, you lived in that industry for 20 years, you know exactly what the pain points are, and you're bringing a solution to a problem that you lived. So that's one way. You've got a technology that maybe you bought some IP from a university or whatever, but it's unique technology or IP that nobody else has, and you have an opportunity to bring it to market first. Or you have a business model disruption. I guess Uber is sort of it's clearly a business model disruption, but it's kind of I guess it sort of sits in the middle. But the net is, you have a business model disruption that's so unique, and some tests have shown that it works. So I think on the B2B side, you really have to have someone in your team, something in your technology, something about the market that really, really stands out, and that's the way you're going to get attention of most investors. On the consumer side, just show the numbers.
Fantastic. Quinn?
Yeah, just one, maybe I agree with most of the comments the panelists made here. Just one maybe thing is, you really gotta, I think, understand the market you're trying to go into. If there's already, let's say in the wearable area, if you want to start a company doing a fitness or activity tracker, it's probably not the right time. There's already 10 different companies making products in the area. So if you want to do a wearable like product, I would say you're trying to find some newer categories, some things that maybe product doesn't exist in the marketplace but solves a unique problem for the consumer. So if it's already got 10 different players in the marketplace, that's probably not one that you want to start a similar company.
Fantastic. One area where it does seem like we've reached a little bit of an equilibrium is around the smartphone operating system environment. So kind of a lot of continued growth around iOS, very well entrenched Android environment. John, why don't I start with you? Is that deceptive or not? Kind of looking 5 years out, is the current conventional wisdom around the smartphone operating environment going to hold up?
Yeah, I don't spend a lot of time thinking about operating system. I do think there'll continue to be fragmentation, and especially as Asia kind of grows, the fragmentation in Android will continue. And there's room for multiple of these players. The way I really think of the world, though, is really on the back end. What's happening with all the data that's being consumed? So I think another real interesting area is, so all these devices are throwing off so much data. What are the insights that you can grab from all that data and the contextual data? So the consumer experience, like how do I anticipate what's going to happen next? What's contextually aware? So I'm really excited to kind of look for innovation that's happening really on the back end versus the operating system. So I realize there's so much opportunity in the cloud that is coming off of these devices that will dazzle and create new experiences both on the consumer side and the enterprise side. That's sort of where I think it's interesting. For example, one of the companies we invested in is a company called Scanadu, and they use this as a sensor to take, so they have a product called the Scout. Scout takes information on your body, blood temperature, blood pressure, heart rate, blood oxygen level, EKG, and like 3 other things. Sends it to the smartphone and then does analytics in the cloud. How do all those vital signs actually work together that's telling you what's going on with your body right now? But most of the processing is really happening back up in the cloud, bringing you back information. That's where sort of the innovation is versus which operating system.
Okay, terrific. And any kind of potential disruptions that any of our panelists would talk about on kind of the operating system or smartphone platform side?
I mean, I think the operating system on that side, I think there's 3 maybe main players now. There's iOS, there's Android, and there's maybe Windows as well. The question is, over time, will Windows grow their market share? And I think that's still probably to be determined. I think Android is definitely here to stay. If you look at in the US, probably maybe split between Android and iOS, but in Asia, I think there's a lot more Android users versus iOS. So I think those 2 operating systems probably will stay for the long haul. The question is whether it be a 3rd operating system or not.
And Quinn, I guess I'd like to kind of follow up with you and transition a little bit, because you have a lot of kind of insight among our panels as to what's happening on the hardware side. So one of the more recent trends, has been the continued growth of the phablet, the potential flattening of growth or even decline in some cases in the tablet market. Kind of what do you see happening there in terms of trends?
I think the definition of a device is really blurring, right? I mean, the iOS, Apple launched 2 bigger devices, right? They're smaller than the iPad Mini. You call it a phablet. I think it's still a phone, right? Just different form factor or the size, if you will, right? And different devices. I think people use it for different ways. Some people want to keep a phone in their pocket, so you want a small size phone can't fit in your pocket. Some people wanted to have a device, maybe you don't put it in your pocket, just carry it with you. So I think different form factors, whatever it's called, phablet, tablets, or phones, I think just serves different purposes. I think they're all going to exist. It's a question of which one makes a better product versus others, and which one have more traction with consumers.
Steve?
Yeah, I'd make an observation that as we're talking here, that what we see a lot of, there's a lot, and I'm not going to create a new name here because I haven't given it much thought, but it had to sort of a sensory amplification or sort of the sensory interface to the phone. So right now, we use our fingers, right? We've got touch screens, so we made the transition from tactile keyboards to touch screens. But then we've got Siri, right? There's companies now that I don't want to give anything away, but there's companies now doing things with.
We want you to give things away.
I know, but people doing things with audio,
yeah,
so that you can talk to devices remotely and get really high fidelity at distance. And then you've got all the gesture technology with the cameras in the phones. You've got the accelerometers in there that you get a sense of what you're doing, so it's sort of a feel thing. You've got all the positioning technology where you've got GPS and the triangulation, the dead reckoning stuff, where you know where you were. So there's an argument that says the operating systems and the form factors will start to change when some of these sensory input technologies start to mature, because it's almost on every single dimension. So, it starts to look like I'm not sure what kind of science. I was going to say tricorder, but it's even past that. It's sort of, it's literally, or it's what Eric was saying earlier, that maybe it morphs into some other form factor, and then all of these inputs become relevant, and then the operating systems have to change to support that. So I would say that's probably one of the bigger drivers, is all of those things maturing.
So I'm just going to agree right down the middle with both of those comments, but I want to make the observation that I think devices are being used. I mean, they're just an incredible part of everyone's life now, and they are more and more becoming specialized. People are using them in airplanes, people are using them in the car, people are using them walking down the street. So there's different needs for different purposes. As the form factors or as the input devices change, it will actually allow more of those devices to be able to be used and created that will come up with new and additional purposes that will make them more practical. So I think we're probably just in escalation of form factors, uses, and I think it's just proliferating across everyone's life.
Yeah, can't resist chiming in, I guess.
Yes.
We talked about this a little before the panel, right?
Yes.
The power of Apple is their ability to build a device, and 200 million people go, that's exactly what I want, right? And that's a very unique skill, right? And they continue to do that. And it's another little side observation is it's funny when I was running off my big old fat 5-inch plus phone, and everyone's like, that thing's huge. Why would you carry that? Look, I could never move away from my little svelte iPhone. And then Apple comes out with these larger displays, and everyone's like, isn't this awesome? How did I, this is the way the world's going. It's like, okay. So, people's, their perceptions shift over time, right? And then you get basically, it's all a function of display size. So you can, pretty soon you'll have it's like the ascent of man, right? You see this array of displays, and it'll define what size of device you want. But it's probably not all that interesting, right? It speaks to the idea that I think that personalization is going to be more important in the future, right? People are going to want to have specific devices for specific needs and not a Swiss Army knife smartphone. And I don't know that that's going to be, again, 2 years, 3 years, but it will happen. And the paradigm we have today about it is all about the smartphone, and it's all about a smartphone that's built in hundreds of millions of units at a run. It's probably going to change. And that'll be an interesting time, I think.
I
Hope it comes quickly.
completely disagree with you, because if I have to charge one more thing, I'm going to shit myself.
It's not necessarily just the smartphone. It's about the access. It's about what you're getting from the smartphone. So I mean, it's not that I love the phone. It's that I love the access. I love being able to be connected. And so that again, I think leads itself to maybe this as we know it becomes something entirely different, but it's still the same concept. It's still access. It's still communication and connectivity.
Yeah, this becomes like the proxy for the individual, though, because a lot of the devices that we're, wearing to make sure that our posture is right, make sure our blood pressure is working, make sure that, we have all that stuff will interface with this thing, and then it sends it up to the cloud. But I do think as an entrepreneur, I pay attention to the sensors that are coming onto these things, because, when BLE comes in, there's new markets that could be opened up, new ways for consumers to interact, and new business opportunities every single time a new sensor comes onto this thing. So you got to pay attention, because as soon as Apple drops this and it goes into millions and millions of phones, the ubiquity of that is really, really interesting. So you got to pay attention.
Well, I'd like to kind of build on that, because definitely sensors are opening up a whole lot of new applications that people never really even thought that they could do with the smartphone. And increasingly people are using their smartphones as the center of a digital hub that runs lots of different devices. So essentially, it is, as you were saying, John, it's the new PC. So you used to kind of connect peripherals up to the PC. Now everything's hooked through your smartphone. So for lack of a better term, we've tended to group all of these things under the wonderful Internet of Things, which is broad enough to be incredibly useless as a description. But I'm hoping you can dig into a little bit behind that and talk about, because there's so much behind it, but talk about some of the things that you think are kind of most interesting that are happening in the field of sensors or connected devices, personalization, wearables, you name it.
Well, I think the first step, maybe I'll get the ball rolling, is moving beyond. When you think about wearables, the current generation is, largely pedometers, right? You put a little accelerometer in some device, and you wear it, and you walk around, and it counts your steps. And I guess I've never owned one, but I guess people do that for a couple of weeks or a month, and then they throw it in the drawer, and that's it, right? Because I guess you're going to ask them to at some point in time. You can't continue to improve. So the next big step, of course, is to put more sensing capability into these devices so that you're able to garner more information and combine that information in such a way that you can make some conclusions about your well-being or fitness. And there's a lot of cool stuff out there, right? So, taking your pulse rate, your temperature, measuring oxygen, that's all very doable, and I think you'll see it coming. It's difficult to do if it's not in close proximity to your body, right? If it's not really close to you, sometimes the accuracy of these things is going to be challenged. So there's going to be, I think, some different form factors that emerge over time that aren't just bracelets, I think, that everyone kind of thinks about now when you think about Fitbits. So I think it's going to be, kind of step one, and of course then you have the back end, right, which is all this information, right? What do you do with it? And, to some extent, I'll just be, throw it out there without a lot. Who owns it, right? And who gets to look at it? And, when I buy a Fitbit, does that mean, or how about a fuel band? Does that mean Nike can sell all that stuff to everybody? I don't know, but those questions need to be answered too, I think.
Read your terms of use, people.
I actually think that that the wearable health thing is a bit of a blip, and it'll come, and it's sort of interesting. I think more of the health care related, medical related things, which are much more sort of vertically focused, are more interesting. But I think in general, I think back to the simple technologies and the Motorola days, and back in the days where it's the oil and gas industry, it's factory automation, it's field service professionals. I think that's where wearables are just going to really explode. And you've seen a lot of that. It's not like I just made that up. But I just think there's so much focus on consumer wearables, and everybody's excited. And you got the clothing with LEDs that flash, or you integrate something in there that can count your steps, or that you can talk to, or what. But I think that's a kind of nice to have stuff, and there'll be innovations all along. But I think the real productivity gains and the real markets and the real big companies will emerge in the verticals first, which happens sometimes in technology, where sometimes it comes consumer to business, but I think in this case it's going to come back the other way.
So actually, a good point. I agree on the verticals, but the way I kind of think about an Internet of Things is really sort of 3 stages. So if you look at the sort of at the bottom of the pyramid, or the stack, it's about connectivity. It's about getting connected. We're investors in a company called Jasper Wireless, and they've been in the field for a while, and they've got a very solid position in that. And so for us, we're pretty happy with that play. In the middle layer, I kind of look at all the different sensors, and I think in this space, and we can talk about wearables a little bit, and but right now I'd say there's a huge opportunity for low cost, low power. And I think if you can actually get those sensors to be much more battery efficient or charging faster or whatever the case is, I think it's going to be difficult until you do. So if you look at kind of the wearables today, I've quoted this a couple times. I'm not sure where I'm quoting it from, but I think the average lifespan of the wearables is only a couple of months, and usually you sort of break your you break your habit of it when you have to charge it one day, and then you don't actually pick it back up again. Then it goes into a desk drawer. And so I think there's that, and so that's why I'm a little bit skeptical on the wearables. I think you've got brands though that can actually really be formed in that level, in that sort of sector, in that middle center of the sensors. top level, though, I think is probably the most interesting, ultimate long term, is the data. And so all of these devices, all of these sensors are kicking off data. And we're investors in a company called Neura. And what they do is they will actually collect information from multiple sensors and then start correlating information to come up with interesting predictions or interesting observations that are actually only available because you're getting data across multiple sensors, and be able to actually predict things, be able to actually plan things for you. And so that's where I'm probably most excited in that space.
Fantastic. Quinn?
Yeah, so I think Internet of Things is a very, very broad category, right? So wearables could be in there. I think the area that we've been spending some time on is around the connected home. So there's a lot of devices, or basically traditional devices that doesn't have a lot of intelligence in them. But nowadays you have, Nest is a perfect example of the thermostat, right? Innovation around thermostat make it very, very intelligent. So I think there's connected maybe security devices, connected door locks. We even see companies making connected irrigation systems, for example, that you can program the water usage, and maybe you will know what the weather condition is and take that into account, so you don't run your lawn sprinkler system when it's actually raining, right? Or your grass doesn't need water. So there's a lot of these, I would say, traditional devices in the home doesn't have the connectivity or the intelligence that will get smarter, will get intelligent. So that's one area I think we see a lot of opportunities around within the bigger umbrella of IoT.
Yeah, I was shopping for a washing machine, like at Best Buy, and I was like, okay, which one of these talks to my phone? Oh, that's the next model coming out. So it's a little ways off. The Internet of Things is really here. It's more than you. So I invested in a company 2 years ago that is an infrastructure as a service, and they're a data stream network. So they allow you to do real-time streaming of data from any device, and you just developers plug into their API, and they have a globally distributed network so that the refrigerator can text you, or you can peel information off the refrigerator. When we first invested, not just a few years ago, they had maybe 100,000 messages running through their distributed network. Today, they have over 70 billion messages running through their network monthly. And those are really many, many, many machines that are kicking off tons and tons of data real time. So it's not just the data and understanding the data, but these things are connected real time. So what can you do with data that's real time? And that's exciting too. So it opened up all these sort of real-time markets. And I think there's a real innovation that can happen when you start being able to have access to this information in real time that could be very, very valuable to consumer experiences and businesses.
So I wanted to mention a side note too, because battery came up a couple times in the context of wearables. And I was just going to suggest that I believe in the next couple of years there will be a class of wearables that don't require charging. Right? They'll basically run. They'll run based on low duty cycle, based on solar, based on energy harvesting. So I think this idea that I got all these devices that I can keep plugging them in is probably going to start fading, at least for a certain class of devices.
Terrific. So we talked a little bit about kind of how essential really the data is in a lot of ways. Maybe one of the most interesting areas coming out of Internet of Things. Probably a lot of consumer concern around security, some high level incidents at the enterprise around security breaches. What are each of you kind of seeing that looks interesting to you in the security space, and is that still a space where you think there's a lot of opportunity?
We've historically done a lot of security investments. We're just talking about sort of internet security, data security in general, and some financial institutions and healthcare institutions, and specific data that's been historically very protected, right? And now we're kind of gotten to the point where there's so much, as all the other guys have said, there's so much data coming from everywhere. I guess there's which data you want to protect, but arguably there's, to some degree, all of us care about some privacy, right? So it does matter. I guess I would just say this. In the last couple of years at Benrock, we see lots of security deals. What comes with that is you get to sit in the board meetings and hear about the customer stories of how they've been breached. So all I would say is, I wouldn't use the word scared, but what a couple of years ago when we sort of had the thesis that, well, if the bad guys do this, we'll just invest in a company that does this. And, if they do that, we'll invest in a company that does this. My sense of it now, with a few data points, is that that's completely gone. That all security companies are morphing into the same company, which is whatever you hear about the other guys doing, you'll do something. It's totally spy versus spy, measure, countermeasure. And every security company I know, whatever product they started with, that'll get them about a year. And then they have to come up with something new because the bad guys figured that out. And they've got all this money in the bank from raising it from VCs, and then they have to, I'm sort of oversimplifying, but the point I wanted to make is it's just a completely unsolved problem. And as much as you read the newspapers every day, from behind the curtains, what I see, it's exactly that bad or worse. And it's I don't know what other word to use. It's just really interesting because it's a completely unsolved problem.
So, no, I agree, and I just want to add an interesting story along those lines. So, I met a company about a year ago that was, their purpose in life when they got started was to create technology that could be sold to three-letter agencies around the world. And they basically gave us, we put a BlackBerry in front of us. They basically punched in the number of that BlackBerry, and they owned the BlackBerry. That was all they had to do. They basically owned the microphones, they owned the data, they owned everything. It was frightening. These guys were actually creating a security company to be able to protect themselves from that.
I just saw that demo.
Yeah, it is absolutely frightening. But I think there's no doubt though that the proliferation of devices, the cost to defend against attackers is growing at a much higher rate than the cost of actually the attackers needing to, what it costs them to attack. And so it's an area that is only going to continue to grow in importance. Again, separating privacy from security. So privacy is about rules and terms of service and other types of things, but then there's a security which is around breaches, and everyone is getting breached. And I think there's no way around that. So it's about mitigating that as well. So it's not just about protecting anymore. It's about actually trying to protect and mitigate.
It's interesting. So you make a really good point. It's the difference between security and privacy. And I think privacy rules are changing as a millennial comes through, right? And as consumers, we start to get experiences like you walk into a Best Buy, and actually maybe I want some special attention because I bought a bunch of TVs there in the past, and it would be nice for someone to come up and give me like front service. Or if I walk into a movie theater, I've been there 10 times in the last month, maybe I could get front row seat. So the kind of dazzle and delight that you can get from exposing some of your data, consumers I think will start to expect that more and more, and be able to willing to give it up a little bit, some of their privacy. So I think that's kind of an interesting dynamic that there's opportunities, but also a little bit of creepiness about it.
I get all that, so the security issue comes down to what's really shifted is the threat vector. It used to be, internal, bad actors inside your company or recreational hackers, and now it's become a criminal enterprise, right? I mean, there's a lot of people making a lot of money off this stuff, and also you have sovereign risks, right? Where you have cyber warfare. So that's one whole big dimension out there, and it's legit, it's real. I imagine there may be a few of us here that really know the scope of this issue, and they're probably scared shitless, right? The rest of us probably should be more scared than we are about all the crap that's going on out there in that realm, right? Because it's, we see the hacks all the time, right? People are scooping up credit cards and names and these things. There's active markets for these things. On the comment on the privacy side, to me, I think you almost have to distinguish between privacy and trust, right? Because to some extent, privacy, that horse has left the barn. There's only so much privacy you can have if you want to participate in the online world. I think what consumers really want is trust, right? They'd like to have some trusted relationships, and those are really scarce. There's not a lot of those, right? Does anybody trust Facebook or Google? I mean, if you do, you're probably pretty stupid, right? And that's the opportunity too, right? For someone to come in and replace those untrusted services with trusted services is probably a pretty big opportunity. doing it.
But the other kind of big trend that we're seeing, in the enterprise is that consumers are bringing their expectations, from, their own interactions with their mobile devices, and consumer services into the workplace, and finding in many instances, that there has been less evolution in the enterprise than there has been on the consumer side when it comes to mobility. Be curious. What are you seeing that's interesting? When it comes to enterprise mobility, and where do you think we are in terms of hitting a peak in that opportunity?
I think, and not so much this year, but I would say the last 2 to 3 years, there was just a wave of companies that came through for, to create an enterprise security, I'll call it a tunnel or whatever, for remote access for tablets, which were basically unsupported in the marketplace. Cell phones had been to some degree where you could remote log in, where you basically could do secure access to your email accounts and so on. There are companies that came out that had the dual personality. You can slide it one way, and you basically had all your, you slide it one way, and IT owns all the apps sitting there, and you slide it the other way, and it's all your personal stuff and your pictures, and a million containers, variation on how you secured certain apps and how you. So I think those companies have done trials. They're just starting to sell. So I think within 3 to 5 years, I think that problem, with the caveat of what I just said, that it's never perfectly secure and the bad guys are going to try to get in if they can. I think that sort of horse has left the barn kind of thing. I think that was last year's story.
What is still early in terms of trends with enterprise mobility?
I think enterprises have to reimagine how they interface with their customers, and they're really having to think of it because their customers' experiences, it's not just within the enterprise, but how they're interfacing with their customers. Their customers are way ahead, and they're trying to catch up. And so I think that's an interesting thing. But what's interesting is from our perspective and some of the investments that we've made, it's really not IT that's doing it. IT is about security and trying to lock things down and just make sure that it's really the line of business that are really trying to take the innovation and absorb new technologies into the enterprise, not so much selling into the CIO and trying to go for the top down. So you're looking for those folks that are interfacing with their customers.
I think I tend to agree with Steve on a couple of points in terms of, I think the first wave is called mobile device management, like AirWatch or Mobile Iron. They're trying to figure out a way for IT to manage your device, right? So I think that's kind of the first wave of companies. I think going forward, I think the opportunity is to figure out a way to have software allow the enterprise to leverage this device, right? Not necessarily locking it down and security, but leveraging a mobile device to offer maybe collaboration things across enterprises, where people will be able to communicate with coworkers, collaborate on projects. So I think that's an area. I think there's probably a few companies working on the area, but it's probably still early days. I think there's opportunities in terms of using the mobile device as integrated part of the employee's work life, if you will, and then leverage that device to improve the collaboration across groups, across the company. I think that's the area where we think the opportunities are.
Evernote, for example, is really driving that line of thought, right? Trying to expand beyond just simple note-taking into more of a productivity application for the enterprise. And I reiterate a couple things that are sort of forgotten segments that I think Steve brought out earlier. It's sort of the kind of IoT infrastructure type of stuff, the robotics, and also the industrial wearables. I think they're kind of, verticals, but I think really important in verticals, and sometimes you forget about enterprise mobility or enterprise wireless, right? Whether these terms start blurring, but I think they are interesting and sometimes forgotten sectors.
Terrific. One of the areas where mobile looks like it's still playing a little bit of catch up to the desktop is in e-commerce, and and mobile commerce. And I'd be curious if you could point to some examples where you think companies have really done a terrific job, implementing a mobile commerce model, and also some areas where you think there's still unsolved problems.
I mean, one very obvious example is like Uber, right? I mean, it's not really I would say, pure commerce company, but all the transactions you do, right? Once you give your credit card to them, you never need the credit card or anything, right? But in fact, you're purchasing car service, right?
Yes.
So that's a huge example of a mobile-first company, right? Leveraging that phone, you don't order Uber online, but that's doing a huge amount of commerce, right? Using mobile devices. So that's one example of a company that's getting very, very big.
Mobile commerce is challenging because of the checkout. It's like the checkout, trying to type in your credit card number and everything else. So we're starting to see some technologies that are solving that problem through authentication and being able to triangulate, using big data and working with the banks and carriers. But it's a challenging area to invest in. Mobile payments in general is a challenging area because there's so many different constituents that you actually have to kind of get aligned. And it's only really someone like Apple that can kind of drive, disruption and change. So it's a very, very tricky area for us. I think where there's opportunity for mobile commerce is, it used to be, Amazon disrupted the retailers with online. But now what's happening is because people want things, if you can connect the offline world and the online world, you're always shopping and you're en route shopping. It's an iterative process where you're shopping all the time. Like I was in Disneyland. I saw someone with some really cool sneakers, so I took a really close peek at it, and I went on to Zappos while my kids were eating ice cream in that long line, on Main Street, and then I bought these things and they arrived. But I really think there's really interesting opportunities for the retailers to take advantage of their assets at the store. And Walmart is starting to do some really innovative things with using the mobile device. You order and you just walk in the store and the stuff is ready for you. Your experience of walking through the store. So there's